What it do, Three Dudes Fantasy Football Podcast, and we are talking some running back news in this week's rundown. There's some really good quotes from coaches and general managers, as OTAs are happening, and then you're going to start to see the value as people do early fantasy drafts. You get the rankings coming out, you get the average draft position, and I think one of the biggest talking points is going to be how big is zero running back strategy this season, because the running backs, the changes we've seen in free agency, it's got me excited. It's got me, do I need to rethink this? Do I need to maybe zig if everyone is zagging back towards zero running back, even in a PPR format? And gentlemen, first off, it is great to see y'all once again as the Three Dudes Fantasy Football Podcast is live and in your face. Let's look at Philadelphia and Saquon Barkley getting paid. New OC, Kellen Moore, he was talking about Saquon being that team's leading rusher. He said, quote, Saquon is a premier running back. First and foremost, we're really excited about his ability to run the football. Obviously, behind this offensive line, he's did a tremendous job, and he feels that he is not only a great pass protector, he's a great receiver out of the backfield. He does a phenomenal job with everything that they asked him to do. I hear that, I immediately think 3-down workhorse. And we know with Saquon Barkley in his history, he has a real injury history. But you got Kellen Moore hyping him up. You got the move to the Philadelphia Eagles. And it's early, but right now, Saquon Barkley, you can get him 15th overall player in drafts. Gentlemen, I just want to get your first impressions on, when you hear Kellen Moore talk like that, do you believe that this could be a throwback season for Saquon Barkley where you get not just top 15, but maybe even top 10 value out of him as a running back?
Well, if you're drafting him top 15, you're expecting him to be a top 10 running back, right?
I'm talking. I should rephrase it. Maybe top 10 player.
Oh, okay. I still believe that though. If you're anybody you draft in those first 2 rounds, your hope is that they end up being a top 10 player, because first 2 rounds are your most important rounds. I like Saquon Barkley a lot, and Kellen Moore's history says they're going to run. We know the Philadelphia Eagles want to run. I think that's who their identity is. I mean, they've been saying the last 2 years they want to run more. Trading for Swift last year, and then this year, getting Saquon. So they're telling us they want to run. I'm just having a hard time from my perspective. 15th, I think I'm okay, right? Middle of the second round, I'm okay with it. I just don't think that's where it's going to end.
Yeah.
I think right now that's where he's ranked. In 2 or 3 months, when we start to do drafts, I think he's going to end up getting pushed up, and we're going to end up seeing Saquon as top 10 player. And I don't really want to draft him there, because I do have a little bit of fear of injury history, and Philadelphia has always been very protective of their players, which is smart because they always expect to make the playoffs, but they'll sit a player for a week or 2 and you never know when that might be. So yeah. I think he has top 10 potential. I just don't want to draft him in the top
10. I'm a little there, with Steve. I think, coaches are always going to hype up their guys, especially new additions to the team. So I definitely see kind of like how Steve said, it's like he might get pushed up a little bit further than what he actually is, but Saquon Barkley still Saquon Barkley when he's healthy, and it's an amazing thing. So
I think that's a question you have to answer, is ultimately when we get to draft season, is he's going to be a top 10 or 12 pick. And so are you going to spend a first round pick on a running back? Because the hype is going to be crazy. And that's what we're trying to cut through with these conversations, is if you want this running back, Barkley has top 3 potential as just a running back when it comes to scoring. And look at last year. He's still the 13th scoring running back. Now, you don't want to be 13th if now he's back in that top 10 category. But I think, you've talked about it a lot, Steve, when you've even been discussing Austin Ekeler, his role in that Chargers offense. That's what we're going to see out of Saquon Barkley in Philadelphia. And I think it's going to be fascinating because the offseason has, I think, challenged a philosophy a lot of people wanted to go to, and that was kind of going the zero running back route. But you get drawn back in by Saquon Barkley in Philadelphia because of that potential. So that's what we're going to have to discuss and keep in the back of your mind is, are you willing to pay first round value for Saquon Barkley? Because I do want to bring up, there was the one hit last year. And if you go to the top 10 running backs last season in fantasy scoring, CMC did it. He stayed healthy. He was awesome in that 49ers offense. But Breece Hall was number 2. And, of course, his was really all the boom or bust weeks that he had. But he was the 26th overall player drafted last year. Travis Etienne actually was 22nd overall player. He was 3. Rashad White was the 4th highest scoring running back. He was 60th overall. You look at Raheem Mostert, 99 at the back end of drafts. He was 5. Joe Mixon, 31st, came in 6th. Kieran Williams, in LA, he was an undrafted free agent for a lot of people. He was 7th. Derrick Henry was 8th. He was 19th overall player selected. So we're talking about someone that was going in the second round. Bijan Robinson finished 9th overall, and he was a first-round pick in a lot of drafts. And Jahmyr Gibbs actually averaged going in the 3rd round last season. He was the 10th overall scoring. And so I just wanted to lay that out because that's what you're looking at. There's a lot of hit or miss when it comes to running back, and having this conversation almost is like trying me to pump the brakes. So I might have been buying back into some of these big name players, but the history is there's more miss than hit with the running back position.
Well, and you named all those players, and besides Christian McCaffrey, he was literally a league winner who did some insane things last season. All those other players were pretty inconsistent. Derrick Henry is probably the next most consistent week-to-week player. He never really had boom weeks, but he never busted that much. But Breece Hall was number 2, and there was games where he'd go off. Like, I think the second week of the season, he had 40 points. But I also know he had a few games under 10. And that's where I get really hard-pressed to draft a running back besides Christian McCaffrey, because your first-round pick, you really need more a low floor and a high ceiling. That's why you're drafting the Tyreek Hills, the Justin Jeffersons, the Jamar Chases. Those guys are the guys that you go, hey, I know every week you're probably going to get at least 4 catches for 60 yards. I know your floor is 10, but I also know you might get 5 catches for 150 yards and 3 touchdowns. Maybe not that good, but that's the concept. And running backs just have gotten away from that. Christian McCaffrey is really the exception. Raheem Mostert had a great weeks and then really bad weeks. And you had Devon Achane kind of chipping in there too. And that's kind of what we're seeing is running back by committees becoming a bigger thing.
It is. And so one of the things that, as we talked it through, is the hype's going to be crazy because, I read you about, Kellen Moore, the new offense, and you put a comment out there like that, you're immediately thinking 3-down workhorse for Saquon Barkley. How about Lions general manager Brad Holmes? When he was on the Rich Eisen show, he was talking about Jahmyr Gibbs, and he put the hype out there even more. He said, quote, he said, I definitely would expect him to see more of a load, but David Montgomery is still here too. I love that 1-2 punch of him and David, but speaking on specifically him being a rookie last year, you saw him start slow, and then he exploded at the end of the season. I think it's coming. So that is the general manager of the Detroit Lions pretty much saying that Jahmyr Gibbs, this isn't necessarily going to be a 1-2 punch anymore, that this is going to be Jahmyr Gibbs getting spelled by David Montgomery. And so then that pushes Gibbs into, that challenge of 10 to 15. Does he become one of those running backs that flirts with being a top 3 pick overall? He averaged 5.2 yards per carry last season. We know he's explosive. The Lions are loading up. They paid Goff. They paid their left tackle. They paid Amon-Ra St. Brown. So it's a similar question to, Saquon Barkley. If you're looking to draft a running back high, which one of these guys are you going to go to? Do you like the young legs over, Barkley that has some tread on the tires?
I've always had a theory. Go ahead, Aaron. You go ahead.
I was going to say, I definitely do. You start to compile injuries over the years. It starts to add up, in my opinion. Younger, fresher legs is definitely something nice to, give you some confidence when you're playing these players, in my opinion. A little bit of caution with Saquon, everyone says it, but I think the fresh legs would be my path. So
I actually believe the opposite. I love rookie running backs, and I hate sophomore running backs. Rookie running backs come in, they're fresh, they're trying to prove their name. That second year, it always seems to be that dip, right? We've seen it year after year after year. We saw, we can go back Matt Forte, Najee Harris, Trent Richardson. All these guys come in and they have an amazing rookie season, and then sophomore season they usually have a dip. I don't know if Jahmyr Gibbs will have that big of a dip, but I also don't expect him to get much higher. So I'm still drafting him as the 10th running back. And that's how I see him. Now I'll probably draft him not as the 10th running back off the board, but I'm also not going to draft him with my thought being a top 10 player.
He's going to be flirting right there. If you look at the early ADP, it's 12.
Right.
Overall
so
for Gibbs.
I'm probably going to miss out on Jahmyr, and I'm probably going to miss out on Bijan because both those players, that's just always what I see and what I believe is that second season for running backs always seems to be where the dip is, and then they come back in that third season if they're going to come back. Now, granted, there's exceptions to that rule. Ezekiel Elliott, and that's Zeke's the only one I can think off the top of my head who had a good sophomore season. But more often than not, you see those rookie running backs dip in their second year. So I'm probably going to not end up with a Bijan or a Jahmyr because of that.
Now, this is interesting because it's, I kind of wanted to set the stage with looking at the dynamic here. We have Barkley versus Gibbs, and then kind of on the back end, some players I'm really interested in that, I wonder if they're going to be probably flirting with second round. You look at, Derrick Henry right now as he moves to Baltimore. He's 36th overall in the early ADP return. So you're looking at a dude you got to get in the third round. But going into Baltimore, you're looking at a team that since Lamar Jackson was drafted, they have more rushing attempts and rushing yards than any other team in the league. And yes, we know Lamar likes to run. He's a 2-time MVP. But I also think that, if Gus Edwards can ball forward in the end zone 13 times, Derrick Henry has double-digit touchdown potential. And I think that he'll take a few of those carries away from Lamar Jackson. So Derrick Henry is the guy that's flirting outside the top 10 in rankings. We were talking about Matthew Berry's rankings last week. I was looking at his running back list. He had Derrick Henry at 11. And the other veteran running back I'm going to throw into this equation where we could be looking at, third or fourth round is Josh Jacobs. So Josh Jacobs goes to the Green Bay Packers, a very young and exciting offense. And we know that they leaned into their running backs. When Aaron Jones was healthy and on, he got a lot of carries in that offense. And Josh Jacobs a little bit higher than Derrick Henry right now. So we're talking start of the third round at that turn. His ADP is 31. And to throw them into this conversation, Steve, of what you just brought up, of while you don't want to overpay for veteran running backs, you might have more of a belief in these guys. And when you look at guys that are 8th in Matthew Berry's rankings, Josh Jacobs, 11th, Derrick Henry, I'm really interested in that third round running back. If they're in the third round, I think even that's where I would love one of those guys for an RB1.
Yeah, so I always look at fantasy from my lens is very analytical. It's risk versus reward, right? So the first round and the second round, if I know that in the third round I could get a Josh Jacobs or Derrick Henry, I'm then 100% going running or wide receiver, or wide receiver tight end, because those guys have a low floor and maybe their ceiling's not as high as Jahmyr Gibbs or Bijan Robinson, but I'm okay with that, right? Unless I can get Christian McCaffrey, I'm okay with a low, hey, Derrick Henry falls into the end zone and gets you 40 yards a game. Okay, cool. 10 points. I don't think that's where he ends, but if I know I'm going to get 10 from him, I'm stoked in the third round to have 2 stud receivers and a Derrick Henry or an Aaron, I'm sorry, I said Aaron Jones. I meant Josh Jacobs. But we're talking Packers.
And that is going to be an interesting one because I do want to put out what the new Packers offensive coordinator Adam Stenavich was saying, and it's the same thing that Kellen Moore said. And it's do we want to believe these guys? He said about Josh Jacobs, quote, he's a good pass protector, so he's one of those guys that you can really have in the game all the time and not have to worry about anything with him. So that's nice. And so then you look at, all right, what's behind these guys? Saquon really doesn't have a lot of competition. He doesn't. Like in Philadelphia, Kenneth Gainwell, we thought was going to be a thing, was never a thing for the Eagles. A.J. Dillon is still there, but he's been a plotter in his career. The name to watch in Green Bay would be their third-round pick, Marshawn Lloyd, who could end up, taking snaps away from A.J. Dillon. But when you look at what both the Packers and Eagles paid for these guys, I do think that we can trust them as 3-down backs. And if I'm talking about value, right, and that's kind of what we're trying to dissect is some of these headlines that I thought were really interesting, because you read headlines like that, people are going to digest them. People are going to then insert them into their fantasy rankings. And I like the value of Jacobs and a Derrick Henry versus paying up for, Barkley or even Gibbs at this point in time. And because I think when you look at these teams and what they gave Jacobs, what they gave Barkley, I'm inclined to believe the offense coordinator. But I know, Aaron, you just said sometimes you also have to take some of these offseason things with a grain of salt.
Oh yeah, definitely. It's always my opinion, though. One thing with Josh Jacobs that I did notice, and you guys may have to correct me after the fact. I think he has a fairly hard strength of schedule for running back. So one thing between those two players, I definitely would be going Derrick Henry. But curious to see how things turn out, Josh Jacobs and Green Bay.
I just trust Matt LaFleur, which is honestly the only reason I'm interested in Josh Jacobs, just because he's him and Mike McDaniel, and they all come from that Shanahan tree where running is important, So it's kind of like I almost always tend to lean on the Sean McVay, Shanahan, McDaniel. Like if you have a running back from one of those teams, I'm good with it. Like I always want to get a running back from one of those teams. Last year, Kyren Williams was the steal, right? Every year it feels like one of those teams is going to have somebody who comes out of nowhere.
Even Aaron Jones ended the season pretty hot, if I remember correctly. So
yeah,
it's like once he was going. So it is interesting. I'm curious to see.
100% agree with you. Like from my perspective, that's all I'm ever trying to do is.
I would say that probably Jacobs may be the better player in the end with more points. I think Henry's going to be probably the safest. Like how you were saying, it's like 40 yards and touchdown or two is still pretty solid. So
yeah, there's going to be a lot of movement over the next couple of months, but if these guys kind of stay in that third round, I would love to be all over Josh Jacobs and Derrick Henry. If they kind of flirt with 30 to 35, if you can get two wide receivers that you really like, lock them into your lineup, and those guys' values stay there, I think that would be a huge win. But I do think we're going to see when we get to fantasy football drafts, all of a sudden these running backs sneak back in to the conversation when everyone wants to kind of go zero running back and just go on the wide receivers. I think Barkley being in Philadelphia is going to skyrocket his value. The hype of just the Detroit Lions overall, so pushes Jahmyr Gibbs up. I think Derrick Henry being in Baltimore, and he's still that name guy ultimately. I think these guys are going to be outside the third round. So if you look at, all right, those guys' value gets pushed too high, the wide receivers then are there for you. And say you go first, second, third round wide receivers, what are you going to be looking at on the back end? So if you did go zero running back strategy, I'm really interested once again in the Tennessee Titans. And we've talked about them a little bit, but their running back coach, Randy Jordan, is hyping up both. He said about when they acquired Tony Pollard, quote, I got to see Tony Pollard when I was at NFC East quite a bit. So when we had the opportunity to get him, I was really excited. I love his skill set. In fact, I love the skill set of both Pollard and Tyjae Spears. So this is a true running back by committee we're going to see in Tennessee. You got Spears last year, 2 touchdowns on 100 carries as a rookie. Now he's a sophomore, but I'm interested to hear your opinion on this one, Steve, because he's a sophomore that is not a 1A. So could this be a situation right now when you look at the Tennessee Titans? You're playing zero running back. You're looking for guys that can have some pop, guys that are going to get touches in an offense that Tennessee's gone all in. They went offensive head coach in Brian Callahan. They invested in wide receivers. So playmakers, they're going to be about Will Levis trying to succeed. And right now, Tony Pollard, 89th overall, average ADP. Tyjae Spears, 121. So these are guys that are flirting on the back end of 30th in the running back. So if you're playing zero running back football, what do you think of the Titans backfield, especially if you're in the RB2 range, looking for a plug and play player?
So I guess before we go any further, the sophomore slump is just about average draft value compared to they're going to perform. So I don't want to make it sound like I'm saying Bijan and Jahmyr Gibbs won't have good seasons. I think they will. I just don't think they're going to have as good of a season as people are expecting.
Investing a first round pick in them.
Right. And so that's kind of what I was saying more than that's why I don't usually go for sophomore running backs, because they get pushed up too high and they don't meet their value. However, in this scenario, if I'm looking at an RB2 and because they're about 30 picks apart and I can grab Tony Pollard and then a round or two later grab Tyjae Spears, because we don't know who's going to be the back. We think it's going to be Tony Pollard, but it very much could be Tyjae Spears. I want both. And I'm stoked if they're my RB2, I'm actually okay with it, right? If I went 0 RB and I have 3 solid receivers and a decent running back 1, and I'm looking at one of those 2 as my running back 2, I'm great with it. Because that means the rest of my team should have great value.
Yeah, I'm glad you said that, Steve, because that's exactly what I was thinking. The Tyjae Spears is going to be so far apart. You could still probably grab him, and whoever it turns out to be, RB1, you can play him as it depending on how things go. You could always trade one, whoever it is, but it'll be interesting. I definitely like that take because that's what I was.
Yeah, those guys stand out to me. And you're looking at the rankings. Say Matthew Berry had Tony Pollard 28, Tyjae Spears 32, and I really like trying to find that pop value, and because these are guys that you're going to be focused on. Even if you draft a running back high, these are good insurance policies to try to catch up at the back end of the draft. Another one that really stands out to me, and I'm a little surprised when you look at the rankings. I'm interested in Zach Moss in Cincinnati. They moved on from Joe Mixon. They traded him to Houston. You look at the Bengals when Joe Mixon was there, they leaned on Joe Mixon. He was a red zone back, and Zach Moss, flirted with leading the league in rushing in Indianapolis when Jonathan Taylor wasn't out there. And right now, Zach Moss, Matthew Berry's 29th ranked running back, and I think he's someone that you're going to see a lot of people start targeting with a zero running back strategy. Is a guy that has performed at a high level, doesn't have a lot of competition if you look at the Cincinnati depth chart right now, and he's another name that really stands out to me when I look in the 20 plus in terms of the running back rankings.
I think talking about him in May is going to be different than talking about him in August.
We'll see, because I'm curious. When you look at it, it's Zach Moss, Chase Brown, and Travion Williams. So it is pretty interesting. It's definitely something to watch, because I liked Zach Moss last season, and I thought that the Colts should have played him a lot more, even when Jonathan Taylor came back. But Jonathan Taylor, how expensive he is, so it's of course he's gonna be playing. So
Matthew Berry's rankings, when I read about that, when he was talking about the Cincinnati backfield, he has an expectation that they're going to sign somebody still. So he's ranking Zach Moss a little lower than.
Who's there to sign, though, honestly?
I'm just telling you, that's what he was saying. I don't think there's anybody that's going to come in and demand a ton of respect. But that's why I'm saying Zach Moss in May is not going to be Zach Moss in August. I think Zach Moss will eventually be pushed into that top 20.
Yeah, and that's what I'm saying. Now, the conversation is put him on your list, and this is obviously going to change when you have your drafts, because that one really did surprise me. Now, I appreciate I didn't see that part of what Matthew Berry wrote on it, because I'm thinking, though, too, there's cuts, but even if it's cuts, it's still, you're thinking it's a veteran back. and I think Zach Moss has more juice than someone you're going to bring in. Like, are we having an Ezekiel Elliott conversation?
Right.
And with Dallas, who, heck, Zeke in this conversation as an RB2. Like, can Zeke at least be a touchdown maker with the Cowboys next season?
I don't know. He's going to be their third down back for sure because he has that comfort with Dak, which is what they were missing last season, is that blocking running back. But I don't know if that really translates to anything.
I don't know. The hype train to feed Zeke's going to come back. You're going to see this bowls and him getting fed.
He'll get his yards. He'll have games where he'll be good, just like he did in New England last season, because there's still a little bit of tread on the tires. I'm probably not drafting Zeke, and if I draft Zeke at all, it's going to be a flyer pick to just try to fill a depth chart spot. Like, I'm not drafting Zeke with the thought of he'll help my team
be in your starting lineup.
No.
Yeah.
So if you're doing that, if you're doing RB2 stuff, right, and you're thinking about zero running back, you need spots to fill. What are names that are on your mind? Like, what backfields are you thinking about?
So, well, that's why I touched on it, right? So I want to touch on the teams that I know want to run the ball. I love Miami's running backs. I think we talked about it last time. Jalen Wright, right? That's a guy I want to keep an eye on and try to get one of the Mostert or the Achane because I think they can sustain them all. I'm interested in getting Christian McCaffrey's backup. I'm doing the same thing with the Rams. Because for me, like, I want to have as much of a good offense as possible that I know likes to run the ball. If one of those guys gets hurt, I have the backup and I can trade, or I have a great running back. So if I'm going zero RB, I'm taking flyers on teams that have good running games.
And those are double-digit picks. So like you mentioned, Wright, who's starting as RB3 for them because Mostert's still. I think Mostert's still going to get drafted just because people aren't going to. They're going to look at those numbers, and as you said, that offense.
But Devon Achane will probably be drafted ahead.
Yeah, Achane is. Yeah, he's going to flirt with top 10 rankings going into fantasy football drafts. And so you mentioned L.A. Blake Corum, rookie from Michigan, won a national championship. Solid running back, not as explosive as Williams, but
he was their third round pick, right?
Yeah.
So. And that's what I'm saying. If we're going zero RB, those are the players I'm looking at. Now, Zach Moss, obviously, it's hard to say who's going to be there, who's actively going to be there when we get to that spot. But
it's like the free agents that are out there. It's like you have Kareem Hunt, Marlon Mack, Damian Harris, Joshua Kelly, D'Ernest Johnson, I think Latavius Murray. Matt Breida.
I'm also interested in taking like a Nick Chubb because he's coming off of injury.
I was looking at that name. That has been something. I'm like, Nick Chubb. I was like, Nick Chubb, Jerome Ford, Donta Foreman. Still, it's like, I don't know what you guys feel about the Ravens backfield that are now on the Chargers. Gus Edwards, J.K. Dobbins.
Those are dudes that I love in this conversation.
Yeah, that's another good backfield.
Because Harbaugh wants to run the football. It's evident. You look at his time in San Francisco, how they got to the Super Bowl. Yeah, it was Colin Kaepernick running, but it was based around a solid run game. How they won a national championship at Michigan with J.J. McCarthy and Blake Corum. Play action, running the football, high precision passing. And I think, Gus Edwards is another one of those guys I'm looking at. I'm excited as an RB2. J.K. Dobbins coming off the Achilles, I would wait and say, he might be one of those flyer picks at the end if you're just looking at put people
Ramondre
on your bench.
Stevenson might be another one to throw out there. He got drafted super high last year, and
so you kind of see the opposite of everyone's so down on the Patriots, didn't get the value in him last year, and that is an interesting one.
I'm afraid they still won't.
Yeah,
it's like
but if you're taking him in the 7th or 8th round, you're not.
That's fine. No, but also
that's what we're talking about, right? Like an RB2 that I could start.
Maybe.
They're gonna listen. They're still an NFL team. And so we still know that they're going to have to get the ball. They're going to get the ball out of Drake May's hands because that's just what they're going to do. And it's mostly going to be to checkdowns. That's going to be Ramondre Stevenson. He's going to get work this season. He's a good RB2 thought process just for what in the context we're talking about.
I see a name there in the Patriots that says Antonio Gibson.
Yeah, they brought him in.
That one's very interesting with Ramondre Stevenson and him, in my opinion. But Steve, you are right that he should be getting the ball because of the rookie quarterback. You definitely want to
I think they played Jacoby Brissett for the first half of the season.
Who now? Here's the question: the Bears running back. Where is he being drafted at this point? Because that would be.
That's a great question.
Same thought.
Does DeAndre Swift get caught up in the hype of everyone else?
And that's why I think he's going to be the one who falls, and I think he's the one you could make a so I'm interested in hey, any of those rookie quarterbacks that are starting, right? So the Commanders, the same thing. Those are Brian Robinson. Is another player you might be able to get later as a great RB2. And we know rookie quarterbacks are going to check down. That's just what they do. And usually the beneficiaries of those are running backs and tight ends. So
I've been looking.
If you don't have an amazing tight end, So
I think the RB2 conversation is fascinating. And I'm glad we kind of started to dig into that because these are names you want to have on your mind as you're getting ready for the fantasy football season, because you bring up a good point, Steve. You need to be prepared because you can find value anywhere, even on bad teams. Patriots was hard last year. I'm going to say it was really hard to find some value on that offense. The key to success is at least knowing where to look, because maybe if you don't draft them, you have them on your watch list and on the waiver wire. And when you look at the strength of schedule, a couple of other things to keep in mind. So I got this from Warren Sharp. Warren Sharp does a great job with fantasy football and everything he has on his site. So they use the projected win totals for strength of schedule, not what the teams did last year. So they take the Vegas win totals for what they expect the teams to be this year, and that's how they do their strength of schedule, which I like the forward thinking one as opposed to reverse thinking on this. And so let's throw it out there. So the top 5 easiest schedules in 2024. And the Falcons are number 1. The Chargers are number 2. The Bears are 3. The Jets are 4. And the Saints are 5. And so that's pretty interesting when we look at what we were talking about in terms of finding some value of the Chargers backfield potentially against an easy schedule. To your point, there's hype with the Bears, but could they back it up? Because they might not be facing a crazy schedule.
I actually think the Bears have a legit chance to make the playoffs this season as a wild card. So I think there's going to be value there. I think this is my hot take is, so I actually think that we see a decline from the Packers because they got to play that easy schedule last year, and they're kind of switching spots. I don't think there's going to be a huge downtake, but I don't think we're going to see as big of a jump.
Green Bay has one of the tougher running back schedules, so it is.
So I really think the Bears.
The same with Jacksonville. I was like with ETN.
Yeah, if you look at some of the hardest schedules in 2024, again, based on the projected win total of the opponents of these teams, 27 would be Tennessee. So we just had a bunch of talk about Tennessee and their offense. They're going to be facing a tough schedule. So it's Tennessee, Baltimore, Minnesota, Cleveland, New England, and Pittsburgh coming in with some of the hardest projected schedules. And so, people are going to have a lot of Baltimore stock from Lamar Jackson, Derrick Henry, Zay Flowers. Cleveland, I think there's going to be a lot of Amari Cooper stock. Waiting on Nick Chubb. Not going to get a lot out of New England. I think that's one it's going to be a challenge. So. And then in Pittsburgh, if we want to talk about running backs, Najee Harris, Jalen Warren, new quarterback, whether it's Russell Wilson,
I think the
Justin
thing you have
Fields.
to remember with what you just said is a lot of those are AFC North and AFC East teams. So like they're
Mhm.
playing each other a lot. So, yeah, they're going to have a hard schedule, and I truly believe that. But the AFC North is a smash mouth football division. They're going to run. Like they might have a hard division, but all 4 of those teams in that division run the ball.
Yeah,
So
that's great. Great
you
point.
kind of have to take that one with a grain of salt. Like, yeah, Pittsburgh has a hard road, but they also play Cleveland, Baltimore, twice.
Yeah.
So it's like, oh, you got to play those 2 teams 4 times. Like, yeah. So they are going to run the ball, and they're cold weather teams. Like we know they're going to run the ball, especially when we get into the playoff.
Yeah, they're built to endure that stuff. Definitely.
Yeah, so it's interesting. I think the RB2 conversation can be just as fun as the top running back conversation, but there's time. And when you start reading these headlines, OTAs are here, coaches, players, they're going to be talking, and we're going to be here reacting to it all. Because even in a 0 running back world, you still got to talk about the running backs.
Yep.
Oh, yeah.
Well, one of the things that did happen today, and I know we talked about it a little bit last time, and EA Sports finally released the trailer for college football. That game looks fantastic. And one of the things people have been talking about too is we're football fans, we're video game players. EA Sports, it always felt different, but in a good way for Madden. And I think, Madden's hit or miss with a lot of people. You either love it or you're kind of tired about it. I think this is fascinating, not just for finally getting college football back, because I'm going to rebuild the Lobos. Let's go. College football playoff. Here we come. Building my coaching staff and putting my NIL collective together. But just kind of getting a new feel, man. Seeing college football, which had such a fun, unique gameplay on a new gen console. It's one of the I haven't been this excited for a specific video game in a long time.
I definitely am excited because I miss the atmosphere of college football, in a video game, because it was different than Madden, and it's something that I hope EA gets right. But definitely excited for it.
Yeah, I always thought Madden had a great gameplay, but college football had the atmosphere down. Like, I don't know how they did it, but it was always one of those things where like, wow, this is awesome.
Got the bands.
Yeah, college football's different. It's fun.
Yeah.
But when they're both out, it's even better because you can import your college draft into the Madden, and that's fun too. That was always my favorite thing.
Yeah, I know. It's just I can't wait, man. It's going to be a great summer filler as we get ready for fantasy football drafts. Well, it is a fun, quick-hitting running back conversation. And gentlemen, it is always great to talk with you, and can't wait to talk with you more in the future. So until next time.
Peace.
Later.